Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 4th, 2024 meeting of the Transportation Commission. I'm Dave Stein. Commission Chair Dick Peretti is currently across the street in Arlington County on a budget hearing, and we expect him to join us soon. Nothing starting at 7:05. We're live streaming the meeting on NBTC's YouTube channel. Our board administrator has already confirmed we are in person. We have an in-person quorum. We have one commissioner who has requested to participate electronically. Jennifer DeBrule is participating virtually for a personal reason, as she is out of state on travel. Is Jennifer on? She's on. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve Jennifer DeBrule's request to participate in Logos?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item passes unanimously. Thank you. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for all the work that you do. Next item is opening remarks. I have none except to absolutely recognize and welcome the Ramada General Manager, CEO, Randy Clark. Welcome, Randy. As always, Randy puts forward more than 1,000% of effort, and here it was even beyond the usual. So thanks so very, very much. So we have an updated agenda reflecting an additional action item on our consent agenda to authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement forward. That's blue shaded. Does anybody have any questions about the consent agenda? We'll get to that in a minute. Okay. You received one comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the Coalition for Smarter Growth did send a comment. We passed it along to the commissioners. It's regarding looking at land use and its connection to transit as a part of our research strategic plan. The research strategic plan is mentioned in your materials, but that's actually going to be a discussion topic at next month's meeting with action a little bit later this spring. But they just wanted to add a topic that the commission may want to take on.
Thanks very much. And that was it for public comments. And thank you for those comments. Next item is to approve the minutes of the March 7, 2024 NBTC meeting. I will move to approve the minutes. For a second, any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstention?
Oh, abstain.
Okay. And the board meeting. Okay, the minutes have been approved. Next item is the consent agenda. 2 items authorize the executive director to issue the request for proposals for state government relations services, and we're authorizing chair to send a letter of endorsement of Fairfax County's application to the Virginia Transit Administration Joint 324 Law and Grant Program and grants for buses and bus facilities. Does anyone wish to remove any of the items from the consent agenda? Okay, not seeing any. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. A second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any no votes or abstentions? Passage unanimously as well. Thank you very much. So Randy, we come to you, and thanks again for being here. I ride Metro Rail frequently. The recent service is noticeably better than it has been many times in the past. And it happened on that side. I know we're waiting for final decisions by the General Assembly regarding the funding of the 3% cap. Also watching what is happening in Maryland and DC since the region benefits and cannot function without Metro. So Matt and Paul, do you want to take it from here and do the introduction?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick introduction. I'm sure most of you now know Randy. If you don't, you're on Twitter or on social media or watching television or reading paper. Randy, since his arrival 19 months ago, almost 2 years, it is really going fast. He and the team have really transformed Metro over those last months. I mean, they truly have. these past several months during the legislative sessions that have been taking place in Richmond, Annapolis district. It's been a particular challenge because of the crisis that we're dealing with in terms of finances. But Randy and the team has really stepped up. They've done a great job, in particular in Virginia. He and Tom and Yatunde, who you've met, our CFO and Director of Planning. We met with the governor and his team 3 times, with the secretary, Director DeBrule, several of the legislators. Matt and I want to take an opportunity to thank Senator Evan while he's here in person, but also Senator Marsden, Senator Boysko, Delegate Sickles on the House side. Those 4 in particular were extremely helpful to us.
Senator
Serville, yeah. And then Director DeBrule and her team, that they have done working with the governor's office on, not only Metro, but, just transit in general and all that they've done. Amy, who we all know, who's our legislative director, and all the local lobbyists that work on Metro's behalf have all come together in a really good way to do that. But again, Randy and his team have really worked hard to transform the organization, and really applaud them for all that they've done. And I also want to take this opportunity, and I know I say it every time, being able to work with Matt on the board, and Matt being chair of finance is really grateful. We worked well together, and Matt brings a real talent to the budget, and really being able to work with people to come to consensus over choose. So I want to take that opportunity to say thank you. So anyway, Randy, I just wanted to do a quick thank you, because it really has been a challenging time, and very different and very unique. We really haven't faced anything like this before. This is truly something that we all came together to work.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just real quick, so just high level, Randy's going to get into the budget with more detail, but I will tell you, we did make some adjustments since the last time we've talked, just based on where all the jurisdictions ended up with their subsidy, their additional subsidy. Overall, very good story here. The amount of commitment we're receiving from DC, Maryland, Virginia, pretty much in line with what we were hoping for. A little bit less than what Virginia actually initially started with. So we did modify our request downward a little bit, which is going to save jurisdictions a little bit of money, about 5 million collectively, as well as the state. And that is to be consistent with what the other jurisdictional commitments are. So that is very, just an update for you on the budget. We are poised to take that up at our board meeting on Thursday, and if all goes according to plan, I believe we may actually pass the budget at that meeting. All of the staff have the jurisdictional subsidy tables, so certainly let us know if there are any questions there, but I think everything is pretty much as expected. And I think Paul and I also want to thank Kate and all the MVTC team as well for everything that they did during the session to support Metro and work with our legislators in support of the effort. So, right.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me here today. I really appreciate it. It's fun to be out doing something. I've never been out a little bit, so great to be here. I'll take a moment to just recognize both our chair and our finance chair. It's as a CEO of an organization, working with your board every day is really, really important. I feel like we have a very trusting, honest relationship, very transparent, very collaborative, the way an organization should be. It's a team effort, all of us thinking about where we're trying to go. I just thank them for all the work they do. They do a lot of volunteer work for this organization, and this year has been especially challenging. Frankly, I think you could say the last 18 months has been challenging, but I am really proud of where we've come as an organization. I thank them for their leadership. I'll double down and thank Kate and the team at MVTC. Some people tell me this is the best we've been coordinating as 2 agencies, but the best, the second best, it doesn't matter. I feel like it's going well. There's ways we can continue to refine it. I know Kate and I will. I have a lot of respect for Kate and the team here. So I think there's going to be some good efforts in the upcoming year here, focus on long-term, what we want to be as a region, how to truly invest in that. And I really appreciate how much Kate, especially in the Richmond side, a really great partner working with us as well. So kudos to Kate and the team for that. Before I start the presentation, I'll just mention, I don't want to not mention, unfortunately, we had a tragic incident earlier today. Around 4 p.m. Brookland Station on the Red Line, we had a young person unfortunately shot in a fatality on a subway platform earlier today. So I just wanted to kind of recognize that. Later on this presentation, I am going to talk about lots of security stuff we're doing. We're making enormous strides on public safety. As many of you know, especially elected officials, we have a serious gun violence problem in America. We are working very hard at this topic. Just sad, tragic things that happen in our country on a daily basis. But we are working very hard on this. We actually had law enforcement on the platform, and we started rendering aid. And unfortunately, was not able to ultimately assist the victim. But just wanted to obviously acknowledge that. As we get into the presentation, this is the first slide is, I don't know if I do the slides or how it works. Okay, thank you. This is the glance. Not almost all of you know this, so we don't have to go through it, but the big part here is we're a big organization with a lot of budget that moves a lot of people that quite frankly is the blood of the region, right? You all know that and the stats really push it, especially the economic stats. Most of the property value is growing around metro stations. Jobs are growing near metro stations, office development near metro stations, new apartments and affordable housing near metro stations, Fortune 500 companies near metro stations. Now connected big into another big airport. You can really see where they go. This corridor is a good example. If you look at the old pictures from this area before metro and today, kind of night and day. So I think, speaking to the obvious crowd here, but where metro goes, everything kind of grows from there. The next slide is some highlights of, as the chair said, I'm really proud of this team. Chair Snyder mentioned, I do keep the gas down pretty hard all day, and the team responds really well to that because I think they're seeing if you will, the fruit of their labor. A lot of people work at Metro because they believe in what they do, and they know what we do really matters to people's lives. And they're working very hard to really make sure this region fully recovers from the pandemic and it can thrive in the future. So a few of the things I want to highlight here that I think are really important. I won't get into all of them, obviously, but I hear from time to time, and I know the chair and board member Letourneau hear this from time to time, people going, we need to understand the transparency of your books. And we try to, we have an independent auditor that's run by the OIG that comes in, and this year we got our 9th straight clean audit. The books are very transparent, they're very well done, they meet all standards, and this is an international firm that does this. And I think it's really important to point out there's a lot of transparency and a lot of oversight at Metro, and all these documents are available online. Another one that I think is critically important here is customer satisfaction. That's how I judge whether we're doing well or not. Right, ridership is a great measure, other stats are a great measure. What do people that use the system think about using the system? In the last quarter, we hit the highest number in the history of Metro at 88%. I tell the team, 88% of people don't agree that it's Thursday, right? We pinch ourselves that we're that high. Now, I want to make very clear, if we can keep it anywhere near this level continually, we are just doing it so well as an organization. So I'm really, really proud of that red dot in the middle. That is a big thing for us, because that is what people really think about us. There's some other things on here, but the one I want to point out that I think is really valuable being in Northern Virginia, our partners at Fairfax. Last year, we got an FTA grant for electric vehicle conversion, $104 million for Cinderbed. That is the largest grant in the country last year. And we did that in a very integrated partnership with our friends at Fairfax Connector. So that goes to show when we're all working together, we can really do really great stuff together. So I won't go through the rest of them, but a lot of stuff there. We're making a lot of progress. Next up is transformation plan. Last time I was here, we talked about we really needed to have a North Star, not a strategic plan that we just do to put on a shelf, something that lives, drives the ethos and the DNA of the organization. And then the transformation plan gets into action plans, developing rail action plans, bus action plans, paratransit action plans, enterprise action plans. And this really to say, what are we trying to be as an organization? You should have a copy of this next to you. This here is our annual transformation report. We're going to produce one of these. This is the first one. Every March, this should come out. I really welcome your opportunity to go through this. Let us know what you think, where we're making progress, where you think we can make more, how you think you have ideas. This also goes to our commitment to transparency. We are really trying to be a very transparent organization, whether it's through our dashboards that show everything from on-time performance and safety metrics to police oversight to this type of thing where we're, I think for maybe the first time in Metro's history talking about procurement, how we manage HR and time to hire. Really some nitty gritty stuff here about the organization. So this is a really good document. Hopefully you'll find that interesting and show you where we're going to go as an organization. Next is really talk about ridership. And we put a little press release out earlier today, and this is, we're really happy where things are going. Ridership in March really is starting to, every month and every week it's been going, but March is really starting to come together. So at 14% year-over-year increase from March 24 to 23. And that makes up we're basically recovered at 85% of what March 2019 was. So I don't personally like what's the recovery to pre-COVID, because who says that was the right number? I want more people eventually on the system than we had pre-COVID. We might have them in different patterns, but we want to run a big system and really get a lot of people around. What's great here is the core commuters are coming back, but you also have a lot of special event and different time of day users. And that only happens when you run a frequent network throughout all day and on the weekends. And so again, being in Virginia, we point out the 28A, very important to some people in this room I know, 79% increase over what we had in the pandemic. So that's frequency. It's a really good, frequent, reliable service. And I think we can work with METC and make that even a better service in the future. Commute times, right? We're actually getting more federal workers back in the system, which is good. A healthier kind of economy, and everyone's using the system. Parking is increasing. That's kind of the ultimate laggard of what's happening. Parking is finally increasing, which is a really big deal for us. If you notice the weekend, we are above what we were in 2019 and 20% year over year. So the weekends, again, continue to excel. Silverline Phase 2 outpacing what we've done in the rest of the network, which is good. That means there's organic growth related to Silverline Phase 2. It's not just growing by the overall network effect. And Dulles increased by almost 40%, right? So that is a big deal. Dulles is one of the most important activity centers for our region, and we can get more and more people on that using that. It's a big deal for all of us. And then of course, tourism. I know we have people on the dais that went to opening day last week. It was a really busy day for Metro. It was our busiest day since I think 2019 or something like that at Navy Yard. Smithsonian hit the highest day we've had since 2019. 69,000 people used Smithsonian Station last Saturday, which is really great. And in Union Station, again, equivalent to an airport, a gateway to our region, saw a big increase of 23% year over year. Union Station is critical to the health of this region, both on a transit network, but also economic development point of view. So all of those things kind of going in the direction we want to see. The next slide, I know we talked about this since, frankly, a lot of people, we talked about this before I actually assumed the role. Fare evasion has been probably one of the biggest topics, if not the topic I've heard from people. And I'm happy to say I'm hearing very little from most people now about fare evasion, which is a good sign that we've made a big dent into fare evasion. So we started a big customer awareness campaign a little over a year ago, a lot more signage. We started working with the schools a little tighter, especially schools that the Kids Ride Free program. We're actually doing a pilot right now where we're going to get the kids on the app on their phone. They may forget their pass. They're not going to forget their phone. And so we're working on that and showing some promise at the start. A lot more police visibility. We had to get control of the system back. I think it's fair to say, as I mentioned this before, when I first got here, I feel like that we did not have total control of the system. Today we're feeling that the system is back to being, as much as we can control the variables that we control, a system like that. We ramped up citations in November 22. Then just a month ago, DC passed a new bill, many I'm sure you're familiar with, called Secure DC. That allows us to do fare evasion very similar to Virginia and Maryland. It's actually made a pretty big difference already. We've actually had a group of people already, I think it's over 20 people that we've had on warrants already taken off the system and arrested because of fare evasion. Hundreds of tickets have been issued. So it's really starting to, do the desired effect that we were after there, which is control the system, and people that have the ability to pay have to pay the fair fare. Then we wanted to kind of connect this with, we also have our Metro Lift program. I give the board a lot of credit for this. This is the first, and we've talked about how we need to kind of get more of a integrated regional approach. This is a regional integrated approach. This is the first time we've done a program where it's not, hey, one partner in Virginia, one in DC. This is all Metro, the whole region. If you're on SNAP, you get a 50% discount on Metro. And that is a big deal to help people that really need a hand up while we try to fair enforce the people that can afford to pay. And so I think that's been a really good, idea to help with social equity, but also, a little bit of law and order. On the technology side, our retrofitted gates are making a big difference. Where we've retrofitted the gates, we're seeing about a 79% reduction. I'll get into that in a section. Our fare boxes on our buses also had to get replaced, and we'll have all those done by the end of the summer. We're starting to see actual more payment on buses because of that as well. We're also converting more and more people to mobile pay. We want to get cash out of the system. We want people to be using their phones, and we hope within a year we'll be able to get a pure just tapping credit card as well. So a visitor shows up at a Dulles of the world, they don't even care about doing the trip smart wallet. They just tap and go. So slowly but surely, we're building more of those programs out. If you look at this slide here, it actually shows a 74% conversion of rail trips now on the app, and 35% using that wallet as well. So again, really trying to push that piece up. Ridership is up 16%, as I mentioned overall, but paid ridership is up 24%. So not only does that mean the fare enforcement's working, it actually means we're collecting more revenue. Collecting more revenue means we need, I wouldn't say less subsidy, we don't need more subsidy, right? Be careful how I syntax that sentence on that. You'll notice, again, I'll have all the gates done by the summer. And right now, we believe we have about a $12 million positive forecasted budget uplift because of the gate retrofits. So that is, the first quarter, we actually guided down on our guidance went down to about 68 million to 12 million. I think we're peeling back now. So slowly but surely, we're getting back into having our ridership models kind of maybe get back into sync. These models kind of went all over the place. The post-COVID world really played around with the models pretty differently. Next up is the budget, and I know Finance Chair Letourneau talked about this. You've seen this slide before. This is what was our revised budget as of February 24th. So this had the listing of what we were going to do for the inflationary reduction, our service cuts. I'll talk about those in a second. Fare increases. On the administrative side, last year we managed the place well. We had a $95 million savings, and we're actually moving towards this year's budget. It's a one-time savings. But we also identified $50 million more on administrative cuts. Some people might think 50 million is not a lot. $50 million without touching service is a very, very hard thing to do. Now we have to execute on this, but the team is confident that we will get that done. The other thing we have to do at Metro, and this is a practice we definitely do not want to make a habit of, this is what happened for a long time at Metro, and we do not want to go back to it, is using the capital preventive maintenance fund to fund operations. It is there once in a while in an emergency. I think it's fair to say we're in a kind of an emergency, a little bit of a world, but we cannot rely on this. And the more we do it, the capital program will not exist. And then we're back into having problems with state of good repair and safety. So, and we will not have people coming back on the system and having great experiences because the system won't work the way it's supposed to. So you'll see a transfer that's listed. Again, as of February, we're looking at a transfer of 104 million. That will go above 60, so it's 164. That is going to go up, I think, a little bit based on where we end up at the board next week, based on the 3 jurisdictions and the final numbers. But again, I want to ground this in February's numbers because this thing has moved multiple times. We go to the next slide, please. So the targeted service cuts and care optimizations I mentioned. We are trying to be very, I will say, use a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. That's the appropriate analogy here. We're going to be very careful to not drive people off the system, continue to grow and recover our ridership. If we raise fares too high, that's going to be detrimental. At the same time, everyone, I think, is honest about with inflation that's happened. It's only fair that fares go up a little bit to actually adjust for that. The general manager's proposed budget to the board, we've had a lot of discussions publicly about this, is a 12.5% fare increase. We think that is a reasonable increase. It hasn't increased in a while. That will generate about 24 million. It also allows us on the weekend to go from just a pure $2 fare on the weekend and late night to a $2 plus, it could rise to a $2.50 cap. So basically a long haul trip, late night and on weekends could rise up to $2.50. Still wouldn't go to the $6.50, but it regenerates a little bit of money and it's a little more equitable because of the distance of some of those trips. If you look at the service kind of efficiencies or reductions, again, trying to be real smart on how we do this. We're not touching anything on the bus side because the redesigned bus network is where we really want to make all that happen. Goal is to really push that forward here. A lot of engagement coming up on that. But things like 6-car trains versus 8-car train sets. On holidays, we probably run too much service on certain holidays during the year that we know we can cut back a little bit there. We were supposed to implement all-day yellow-green on a 6-minute frequency. And we decided that on the weekend, and we decided we're not going to do that at this point. We also wanted to get the orange line down to 7.5 minutes. And right now we feel that 10 minutes is appropriate for the ridership levels. And then hopefully what that means is, and it sounds weird to say this, at some point we will want to hear customer complaints that it's too crowded, knowing that means we can't have 6-car trains and we can't have 10-minute frequency. And I think that's really the goal we shall be hoping for is upset people saying there's not enough service and it's too packed. That's what we should all want. And that means our investments are really working. So that's kind of how we looked at optimizing against service and fares. Next slide is the kind of the path forward here. So again, on behalf of the whole organization, I know the chair has said this publicly, and so board member Letourneau, really want to thank our delegations both in Virginia, Maryland, and DC. The mayor in DC came out with her budget yesterday, confirming the $200 million from DC. Maryland pegged 150 and Virginia pegged 130. Obviously, Virginia, you all do it a little differently than the other two. And so that is kind of a 50-50-ish kind of situation. Or I guess that's generally how it's done here. But subsidy levels are going to then be set kind of how these balance out in our formula, and we'll get that done next week. And then we anticipate from a staff point of view, the board could act as early as next Thursday, the committee and the whole, do the whole budget. That's where we're at. So that's $480 million of additional operating funding. It is a big deal. And this should hopefully get us to a point again, preventing these draconian cuts that would just cripple the region, preventing a massive fare increase, trying to keep it pretty equitable, really trying to keep the system momentum that we've got going here, and really try to create a little bit of space to have a longer conversation on what we all want to do long term. I'll wrap up with a final slide. I think this might, yeah, it should be. Is I just wanted to highlight something. I think, in the 100 years of Metro, when they hit the 100-year mark, hopefully, I think this will be one of those marks that people will go, oh yeah, that was a really interesting thing Metro did. We had over 40,000 people visit our 8,000 series in electric bus models on the National Mall. The last time this was done, LBJ was president and walked through a Metro train. And I think we paid homage to that. And I think, from a staff point of view, especially, and you probably all feel this way, there's a uniqueness about Metro. It's pretty special to be this national capital place. And we have people from all over the world, all over the country, plus locally coming here to see this, to be part of it. And sometimes these are the moments where we got to, step back and realize we have a really good system here and we got to make sure we protect it for the next generation. So it was really a pretty cool moment to be part of this. And our Park Service friends were really helpful in making all this happen. So with that, you're welcome any comments, questions, thoughts, and feedback, especially if you got good trips up there. We love to hear about them.
And
So
so
thank
very
you.
good. Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to our board members who work tirelessly on all of what we have. Well, now's our chance. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Randy, and thank you for joining us. Despite your lip, I know nothing stops you, so excited to have you here, Virginia. Let me just start with a comment to share with you earlier. I was thrilled getting on Metro to come over here today that it was packed. I was happy that it was packed. Normally a little claustrophobic was a good sign. And my husband took our 2-year-old to the last weekend, so mom could have the morning off, and she loved. that. An excellent ride, safe, comfortable. Way to get there. I think the one thing I want to confirm, I know you brought up the 28 bus, and to us, right, Metro is a part of the system. Larger system, and you run a large number of them, so not all. There were some concerns, which went a long way from your last year, much more positive place. You had proposed a lot of bus cuts in the last budget. I just want to confirm that the bus cuts are off the table, that we are no longer looking to cut bus service in this upcoming budget.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad you had good trips and that you're handling using the system, so that makes me feel good that you're having those. Yeah, as I mentioned, so the initial budget, we had no commitment, so as a general manager, I have fiduciary responsibility to put a budget out. So on the revised budget, we have no envisioned cuts to bus. Quite frankly, we need to have a larger conversation about where we're gaps in our bus system, and our network redesign is a big step to try to move that forward. And that could create a regional foundation and really start filling those gaps long term. We think there's tens of thousands of more bus trips out there for our region to be using bus. So we look forward to working, whether it's Fairfax or Arlington or Alexandria, it doesn't matter, how to integrate these networks and even get more people on the system.
If I can add one follow-up to that, I think, and I assume you're on board with it, is number one bus, right? My husband takes the bus to get to Minutes, not a walking distance. And so looking at how our buses function right now to get to and from Metro, but also, as we know, necessary to get across north and south, and 20A historically doing excellent, the future BRT7 route. And the other thing you mentioned earlier that I hope we're all partnering on is looking about both getting our youth as well as our older adults more comfortable, trained, and we're able to take the bus, get on public transit. The way I call it is let us do the driving. It's safer and gives you a little break. So I don't know if you have any comments, but I'm looking at that whole network and how we all continue to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We need as operators in the region to make it simple. And the bus can be intimidating for people because the train is I go downstairs and I'm either going like east, west, north, south. Like worst case, I miss a stop, I go the other way. Like it's a little more simple. Bus is intimidating for a lot of people. So one of the things in their network redesign is we're thinking through a whole new numbering sequence and lettering sequence. Because a lot of these numbers are just like old trolley streetcars that have no bearing. And there's a lot of stuff that's like, oh, something in DC hits, I'll make an example, hits a Maryland line towards Bethesda and it changes. That's not how people live their lives, right? People live their lives in Fairfax and they go to work wherever. No one thinks about our political jurisdictional boundaries except people in government. Everyone else just wants to live their life.
Highways have numbers that we could.
Yeah, and we want to use that to drive simplicity. Our stop signs should be much more uniform one way or the other to make it people like, we have sticks that have like 7 steins on them. We got to figure out how to do that and drive people. We need to make this easy to tap and go. So we want to partner with, whether it's MBTC, the region at large, all these things. And it's especially important for young people and older adults that really rely on the system more to get into that.
I just want to finish. I'm from Buenos Aires, where the bus system is how you get around.
Yep.
And my mom couldn't see the numbers, but she knew the color of her bus and every bus she had to take. So the more we make it easier, people to know where to go and everything. It's so
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Walter.
Randy, thank you for being here. I want to share something with the commission. I don't think most of you have heard this story, but every once in a while I'll go to a board meeting because Mr. Letourneau can't be there, the alternate director. And I was actually at your very first meeting.
Yeah, it was really bad timing. Like, really?
But I think you've been CEO for a few weeks, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe not even a
Couple weeks, maybe.
couple weeks. And there was a discussion at the board meeting about fare evasion. And I was immediately impressed because at the time there was still the installation of some of the old fare gates with the old architecture. And even before that first meeting, you had stopped that installation. you stop. Basically, because you recognize that that was not something that would stick, that it had to change, and you didn't even wait for a board meeting, you just did it. So I very, very much appreciate, I knew at that point you were gonna be a no-nonsense CEO. And that combined with your full-throated advocacy for WMATA and for transit, I think is exactly what we need. So thank you very much for that. You know, for those of us around the room in our jurisdictions, many of us have, well, we kind of bet the farm on transit in terms of our economic futures. So we depend on Metro, on WMATA, to not just perform adequately, but really to excel. And so I appreciate everything you've done. It has been a remarkable turnaround that we've seen. We do have some challenging discussions coming up over the coming year or two. And I know as part of that, it's not only identifying where we can get funding, hopefully dedicated operating support, dedicated revenue for that, for WMATA, for other transit. But there'll also be some uncomfortable discussions about management issues and maybe some history. So in advance, I just want to say thank you for your commitment to working through all those issues and coming out with a good solution, because I'm confident, you know, working together, we can make that happen.
Well, one, I just say I really appreciate your comments, and like recognizing the team has worked incredibly hard for the community. I mean, we all live here, right? So we want this thing to work really well. We understand how much you all, I mean, this region has invested in Metro to be the backbone of our regional success. So with that expectation comes a lot of responsibility, and I promise you, the team takes it very seriously every day. We want this thing to run really well. We use it, we care about it heavily. And then on the latter part, yeah, we should put it all like, and then I give again, the chair's been right on everything. He said it multiple times. He said it with the hiring process. So frankly, one of the things I got really interested in is everything's on the table. And that is the attitude we have to have as a region. If someone made a decision in 1982, maybe it was a great decision, but maybe today it doesn't make sense. Or maybe it does still make sense and we just then stop talking about it and stop bringing it up. We need to put it all on the table because we are in a kind of an existential moment here, and we filled the gap. But we didn't solve the thing. We stopped the bleeding. And it's not just us, it's all of our operators and what we want to be as a region when we grow up, if you will, right? Like we got a lot of growth potential ahead of us as a region. So I commend the board and thank you for that comment. And if there's ghosts in our closet from the past, we should just be transparent, and it is what it is. Yeah, thank you.
So, Chair, befriend is, and have you just witnessed a peaceful transfer of no power?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair Snyder, and I think that it's a tax rate hearing, and so I hope folks in the room will understand why I really had to be there, and we had to keep this found. So I think we've had a couple of comments, a question and a comment, and I think Commissioner Bagley had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here for the presentation. I was one of those 40,000 trips on opening day, and it was a great experience, full trains and a lot of happy people, not with the score, but with the service. I was curious, I have sort of two questions, and they're both a little bit related to infrastructure. The Fleet of the Future and the 8K, I'm curious if in any way our budget conversations, our visioning has changed at all, sort of the purchasing plan, the delivery plan for the 8K. Is that, from the last time they were sort of presented and discussed, are we seeing anything?
I would say generally the same posture. What we have to figure out here is how to exercise our option one. So the original base order is going to allow us to replace most of the 3Ks. We need the option to put all the 3Ks to bed once and for all. Our 2Ks, we're really close. We have a board meeting, I think in May, that we're going to do a large conversation on fleet. But the 2Ks have done their time, and as best we can, we don't want them actually out on the network anymore. So, they're 40 some years old at this point. They were already mothballed and brought back when we had a 7K issue. 7Ks are going really well right now. We're repressing our wheels. We've identified that issue. We're very collaborative with NTSB and WMFC on that. Our new chief mechanical officer that we made chief mechanical officer a little over a year ago has done a fantastic job on this program. There's a lot of experience throughout the business. So we feel pretty good with how we're moving that program forward, and they're now recovering back into the system, so they're coming back pretty quickly. And that's going to allow us to continue to run, again, the best, more modern fleet. That means it's not only safer, it's more reliable, plus the customer experience is better. So that's what we want to move forward with the AKs to eventually get rid of the final part of the 3s. Then we have optionality in those contracts to also do fleet expansion, and then long term, in theory, we could do 6K replacement, but that's really long term. 6Ks, they should have a good 15 years left in us. So at some point, what we have to do, and this, I don't want to keep going back to the funding question, but everything comes back to this. And unfortunately, it's illogical for most people to say, let me get this straight. You have no money and you're spending cuts, but you build new trains. And it's like, well, that's capital, that's operating, because human beings don't have operating capital budgets. Again, only businesses and governments, right? So the average person does either go to dinner or fix my fridge, right? And so we have to figure out how to reconcile accounting versus what we want to do. And a good example of that is our long-term funding will ultimately decide our operating service plan. And our operating service plan dictates capital plan, which dictates our fleet plan. All of that has to connect together. And we can't just do one without the other, because there's no buying trains and saying, hey, we want to run all 8-car trains, 6-minute headways on the orange line, this, that, and the other, and then there's no operating budget to connect to it. So to Supervisor Osborne's point, when we figure this out, we have to have not just the operating long-term funding, we have to have the capital, and we need to stop decoupling them and actually couple them for a strategy versus just for accounting treatment, if that makes sense.
No, I appreciate that and the breakdown. It's every once in a while I still come across a 2000 train, and it's kind of wild to think about who's ridden that train, in the 40 years.
LBJ.
Right. And then the other question I had is, admittedly something I'm personally always following is, I used to be one of the few bikes on the Metro. Inevitably, when I got on, I was the only one with my bike. And that's just not the case anymore. Most times when I get on my bike, there's another bike on the train. And I know VRE, their bikes on VRE has gone up, demonstrably as well. And so I'm curious, how, if at all, that impacts, ridership or the plan. Do you have to think about, bikes being put on Metro bus? Do you have to think differently about how people are accessing the system as we build out bike infrastructure, in the network? And we see more of the train. Is that impacting the experience or the infrastructure at all?
Yeah, obviously, really healthy communities are all working towards getting people out of cars or less time in a car, right? So like if we lost a person, let's say we get to some number 3 years from now, and then we cap out and we lost a % of ridership and went to bikes, we shall be like, okay, that's great. Like we should not be up, like bike is not competing with transit, right? Walking, biking, rolling, transit are on this part of the ledger, and over here is VMT. And we got to drive down VMT and get more people in more sustainable ways, right? So I think you know that very well. So we're all working towards that. I think this bike policy that the board did actually before I got here, very smart policy. The 8Ks actually, we changed the seating layout a little bit specifically for more space. So you can have a bike, stroller, luggage. So it's not as kind of clunky. Not everyone sits the same way, right? Not everyone is a Vienna to Federal Center commuter. So we got seats that work for those people, but we also have other seats at Bernatstein. We got space if you're going to Dulles. We got space if you're taking your bike somewhere. So I think overall, as we continue to build our bus dedicated lanes and our bike lanes, all these things are going to continue to drive well together. And there's a lot of people in this room, I'll give you a lot of credit. I was on the planning board in Massachusetts for 7.5 years. That is ultimately where the whole thing changes, is land use. Land use is what matters heavily in America transportation. Your transportation plan is, an outcome of your land use. And a lot of you are really trying to build more transit-oriented communities. And I think TOC is where we really need to be thinking about, not TOD. DOD is the development. The C is how we are trying to live and all work together. So, and that's not perfect. That's not the same for the whole region. Obviously, we have a very a diverse region and landscapes and rivers and all this other stuff. But where transit is, we got to figure out how to get more people closer to.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wong, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Randy, agree with everything that's been said about your leadership. Thank you for your great work so far. Slide 8, I just have a question on the salary and wage adjustment assumptions. And then note it said the assumptions here, and you've discussed this before, the 0% salary and wage increases in FY 2025. I guess at this point, you're pretty confident in that assumption for FY 2025.
What I can say, and very good to see you, Supervisor, is there will be no wage and salary increase for non-representative employees. So I appreciate you recognizing the team's great work. Those individuals will be not getting an increase. What I propose in the budget is, again, I want to be very clear and careful with the language. The budget proposal is not the exact same as collective bargaining.
Right.
So that is in our proposal from a budgeting process.
Yeah, 0%.
For 1 year. And that is something, obviously, we have to have an open, fair process. You know, we got a lot of great people at Metro doing a lot of hard work, but we had to do something in our budget proposal related.
Got it. I guess what is the timing for the collective bargaining process?
We are currently in negotiations. And I can't really, outside of.
Sure,
saying that.
Understood. I guess out of just looking at the region, 0% would be out of the norm.
Well, we did 21% over the last 3 years, which was way out of the norm. And that was contractual for what was bargained at the time. So we met those commitments. But I think the board's feeling is, in light of that, when those increases were happening, when most of the county and state workers were not getting those, this is sort of the catch-up year as part of a shared sacrifice. When you look at the ledger here, if that number were not to hold, then that's going to be PM transfer, because that's the only option that we really have.
Or
25 and police.
Well, I would say we can do PM transfer or service cut.
Or service
Or
cut.
fair,
Or
or fair
service
increase.
cut,
It has to come from the customers cutting service or reducing the capital project.
And the fair increases don't.
And typically in the collective bargaining process, you come out of it with a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract or?
It varies, I think, in the history of Metro. So something we're having good discussions with.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you both for that. Commissioner Story?
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here, and I share the compliments that everybody else has just, I've seen the difference as well. And I wanted to start with particularly something that I value, not because it's big, but because it matters maybe. And that's with fair evasion and what I call the broken window theory of anything, right? If something is not fixed right away, then people assume that something is not going to work. And then they get slack and sloppy, and you get that as a work product, which is not supporting any of those. But I was curious on slide 9, the calculations or the estimates that were made about the reduction in ridership as a result of the fare increases that are there. And I know that this is more detailed than maybe we share now, but is there some studies in the past that show that this has been the case? Because those seem like substantial reductions for something that, at least if you look around and why you ride, and I know we've looked at VRE many times, it's because it's convenient more than per se the price itself. So is there anything more that we should understand, or is how strongly you believe that this is going to be the impact of those kind of increases?
Sure, well, good seeing you. Great question. And I would say, I think to your first point, small things are what matter the most. And if we don't do the small things right, then the big things can never get done right. So, you know, when we talk about one day we got to build a new big subway line to deal with the Lawrence Silver Roslyn connector issue. If we can't keep stations clean and other stuff, then, you know, can't do the big things, right? So I think the little stuff always gets overlooked in our world today. That's where I'm really proud that team focused on that. So thank you for bringing that up. On this, so these are models, right? These are where we think the numbers will be. Now it's hard because there's a lot of macro stuff we don't control. We don't control federal government workforce. We don't control a pandemic. We don't control other kind of, you know, externalities. So basically in transit, just like other kind of industries, you would put all these things in, and there's just the elasticity, if you will, demand curve of fares. So it's about 5% reduction. of ridership is what this would end up being, give or take. Now, it's not monolithic either, right? So VRE, I would suggest is a kind of a different piece. So more people on VRE, or I'll take VRE, commuter rail. Elasticity on price may matter a little bit less than if you are low income using a bus system, as an example, right? So the difference between a $2 fare and $2.50, if you're on, say, fixed income Social Security, might be different than if you're a federal government. First of all, if you're a federal government worker and you're living in Manassas and you're going downtown, or you're living in Vienna going downtown on Metro, and they're paying the bill, this doesn't matter at all, because that just means the federal government's covering a little higher share. If your business covers it, it doesn't matter. So it's kind of like we're not monolithic, you know what I mean? And so this is our best estimate on this. We hope, obviously, that as we run great service, that no matter what we do for this price, our high quality frequency and reliability will actually negate the downward pressure on price, because people will say, like, we're convinced traffic's only going to get really bad again.
Yeah.
By the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally want the president doing a Beltway motorcade like every night. Because it literally destroys the entire regional traffic network. But when you put those things together, so again, it's kind of like a really complex of this variable versus that variable. So
Just across the system, or when you say that's the overall reduction, that's between bus and.
yeah, this is the overall system. Yeah.
So you're saying they're not even gonna switch from one to the other, this is just.
Well, they could. And depending on where you are, you might go, I'm gonna use this type of pass product and use it this many days, or one less day I do it, or that's what I'm
I'm
saying.
really curious as to how that worked in, I mean, obviously, there's been this modeling done before, what was the actual outcome of that prior model, so.
I can't,
That's really more for you all to look at, but that's kind of my question.
Yes.
Then I had a second item I want to mixed use is, the BRT line up Richmond Highway, is still heading in the direction. We're still waiting for FTA to bless us and open their wallets, but I think we're close. The interface between the Huntington Metro Yellow Line and the BRT line has been a core concern that I've had. And for a while, I didn't seem like we got a whole lot of support from Lumada. I think we're getting it now, and in fact, I'm very pleased with the recent support, because we're trying to create that interface, because the core of ridership, in my mind, is keeping people on from the very beginning to when they hit Huntington. The key part of that is it's a simple, easy on, easy off. And the existing design is it's a surface parking area, and you have to come up on the rain, you come up an extra escalator, et cetera. So I just want to thank you and your staff for their flexibility in looking at that. They worked very hard with Rachel Flynn and our staff to put together a proposal to the feds to try to fund that. So I'm hopeful that will come through. But again, I wanted to thank them because they were very helpful in putting that together. And we hope, for all of our sake, that we get the $40+ million to make that an underground connection that would be out of the weather and really would truly make a 21st century.
yeah, thank you for recognizing the planning and real estate teams are really excited about it. You're right. At the end of the day, it's how all this works together is people are going to use the system more, because who wants to stand out in the rain or in the snow or all this other stuff. So the more we can be, again, seamless, like, we talked about VRE earlier, or Amtrak, take King Street. We're on one side, it's on the other. These are the good examples where we got to get our infrastructure. If you use the system, would that be how you'd want to use it? And the answer is generally no, some places. So let's all agree what we want to do and fix it.
Great, I think we got another question from Commissioner Polchik, and kind of getting towards the end, if you want to sneak one in, make sure it's a question, not a comment, and it's a quick one, but go ahead. Okay.
Definitely a quick one, because there were a lot of good ones that made me ask, and it's gonna be a follow-up, just looking again at slide 9 and parking rates remaining unchanged. I'm wondering, have you all started to look at demand pricing or other creative ways to think about parking, costs and how it impacts and by information, et cetera?
Sure, great question. So right here, we did want to touch parking this year because we're really trying to get parking back.
Right.
What we're doing is we're looking at updating our entire parking management system. which is gonna allow us to, like a good example is, we don't do overnight parking. There's places that clearly we should do overnight parking. Huntington is probably a great example where people would love to overnight park to get to National. I mean, we have days where Dulles and National say there's no parking available. Like they just last week, they were like, there's no parking. So we have garages that sit there overnight and people are like, I can't park. And you know, up at Shady Grove is a totally different place that people would want to park. We can't do that until we have the software and the system. So we are actually working on that right now. And then I think that's going to allow us to be a little bit more flexible and granular on hourly versus half day and some other stuff. And we're doing that with our bike program now. Our bike lockers, we're moving towards like kind of hourly, half hour, all this other kind of stuff to really, you know, get more use out of these assets. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Polcher, our President or Chair Maritime, Vice Chair Snyder. And then we'll go to the.
Sure. Well, thanks. Thanks for the work on public safety. Also, I think BRT has a real great future in this region and very anxious to have your engagement in all the BRT discussions, especially the Route 7. It's a major priority. So thanks again.
Thank you. More BRT would be really good for this region.
Sure would. Commissioner Smedberg.
Any final words?
So, just thank you again for having me. Appreciate it.
So, yeah, I think you can see why the board hired Randy and all the work that's being done there. One thing I did want to update folks on the IG search, a lot of you have asked along the way. So the executive committee is underway with that search right now. We're using the same recruiter that we did for the GM search. We're following the same sort of process, given the high profile nature of some of these candidates. Our current IG, our acting IG, Kevin Mullendorf, has done an amazing job. He really has done a great job. He's a partner of Wiley. He's got to go back at some point. But he really has done a great job. He's really been working well with staff, which is really great. He's already made several transformations during his time there. So just wanted to update you.
Thank you very much. And then I'll just add, since I came midstream, I think you know, I lived in Austin and Cat Metro was not popular when I was living there, even amongst a very transit-friendly community. And it seems to me quite impressive how you learned Richmond and evolved in this very different environment. And in both cases, it seems to me as though you're trying to outwork the problem, which really is inspiring for all of us. And so a big thank you. And we all know that the current story for the next weeks is not done. But I also think it's worth just pointing to all the commissioners in the room, because a lot of folks were in Cambridge, Maryland, and over the last 9 months in a different place. And Katie, there's a lot of credit, but a big thank you to you and your entire team.
Thank you again. Really appreciate you all. So,
Thank you.
all right.
Absolutely. Please
I gotta go put my
take
weights
care
up.
of your knee and thank you. And I think you met for access to get here.
I had a great Metro Access trip and look forward to one going home. Really important part of our system that doesn't get attention and credit. So, again, thank you all.
Take care of yourself.
I will. Thank you. My wife would appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you. Well, I'm glad that we had a full discussion. We will turn to item 4C, which is a report from Mr. Alphon, Chair of our monitoring.
Thank you. Just very quickly, some kudos here for NVPC staff, who've been working very hard for the past months and year on the operating funding and reform working group. So this is the Vermont County brief and position been briefed on this as well last month or February. So the report is, the report is a menu of options for new transit funding in order to not a roadmap, but it is a menu of different possible options. So this is really going to serve as a foundational component of the upcoming Senate Joint Resolution 28 study. Thank you, Secretary Evans, for that. That's slated to begin. So the commission is going to be asked shortly to take action to accept that report. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, but before I do that, just a reminder, we're going to have a joint WMATA and Legislative Policy Committee meeting on May 16th at 6 p.m. and that'll be upstairs in the conference room. So, Andrew, all you.
All right, thank you, Chair Alcorn. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll try to keep this presentation as tight as I can. So the work group was a staff level effort that started in 2023 at the direction of the commission to look at funding options for Metro in light of the anticipated operating fiscal cliff that we have all discussed. The group met multiple times in calendar 23, and we provided numerous updates to the WMATA committee, the legislative policy commission, as the leadership of this work. The working group's efforts were foundational to recommendations in the 2023 annual report on WMATA, which was commissioned in December. As Chair Alcorn mentioned, the working group set out to develop revenue options, provide technical information to commissioners and other stakeholders, help inform these long-term. The effort started just looking at Metro recap. And it was apparent that the region short-term solution for Metro. We broadened the concept to include a capital solution as well, as there is a capital fiscal threat on the horizon, and to look at funding for all transit agencies operating in the NBTC district, as all of the agencies are collectively feeling the impacts of the pandemic, albeit at different timescales and different scales and different timelines. The working group also set out to benchmark Metro against peer transit agencies in terms of some accountability measures. And the report also discussed the 3% legislative operating cap. That was not an explicit charge of the group, but it was a common theme that emerged in discussions with jurisdictional staff, mostly about the problematic unintended consequences of the current cap as they put in growing. So the report documents these findings and includes some for any potential future revisions. Next slide. So the working group started with a broad consideration of 41 different revenue sources and narrowed those down to ultimately the 10 that you see on the left of the slide here, where our consultant team prepared revenue estimates. These are a diverse array of sources. Some of them are already used for at both the state and regional level for transit and transportation funding. Some are just wide and some are new. There's a wide range of diversity in terms of size of revenue they can generate and proportionality of how that works within the NBTC district. We developed revenue estimates for fiscal 25 at the NBTC district level 10 and for these which are statewide at prior to fiscal year. So next slide. So this complicated graphic here is to respond to charge of the working group, which was in addition to developing estimates. The working group was charged with developing a recommendation on the structure and flow of the potential funding. So the structure shown here, but the recommendation is to have any new regional or statewide funds flow to NBTC to benefit all transit agencies operating in this district. So this would accomplish a number of goals. One, to support all agencies. Two, to provide that regional long-term solution to Virginia's share of Metro operating capital needs. Creating a model that recognizes our jurisdictions participate in WMATA services differently, and that they also have their own systems. And that some of our jurisdictions are in paid for VR regions. NBTC is the co-owner of VRE, a compact eligible funding partner to WMATA, and plays with funding coordination role with all agencies, as well as elected officials who represent those jurisdictions. Agencies is the right place to direct any funding, and so as the next step, we could develop an allocation framework to help accomplish these multitude of objectives. The revenue structure recommendation also envisions that any new sources would be largely in addition to and on top of the existing funding structure. And then after some of the lessons of the 2018 funding deal, working very, very strongly that the establishment of a covered expense. For recipients. Next slide. So as I mentioned previously, the working group also looked at some sort of reform considerations. That specifically was to look at accountability for transit agencies and look at sort of an array of publicly available information. Simply put, WMATA did very well. They performed above average compared to their peers. We heard that story from the WMATA general manager as well, but we confirmed it objectively with. And this, I think, reflects the significant quantity and quality of reports, open data resources, and other information produced by WMATA for the public, and the way that those products have improved. Excuse me, since 2018. So as we've discussed before, the working group is a foundational document in Shape 28, Mass Transit in Virginia study sponsored by Senator Evans. That joint resolution that passed the House and the Senate in March establishes a joint subcommittee to study long-term sustainable dedicated operating capital funding for all transit agencies and BTC carriage districts to look at cost containment controls and strategies for Metro. Executive Director Kate Mattice gave a detailed overview of this group and composition and structure. Next slide. So if we step back and look at sort of the broader timeline here of these efforts, you can see how MVTC work, path MVTC work fits into the bigger picture. In 2023, we debuted the value of transit to the study. That same year, we started the work. I was looking for 2023 report, and essentially with the release of this report this month, both of those reports will be foundational inputs into that larger that study could look at additional inputs like our regional budget analysis, plan, local agency transit development plans, and WMATA's capital operating funding needs to help us collectively chart. The joint subcommittee of that effort is mostly senators and delegates, but it does include a Virginia WMATA board member, a member of NVTC director. There's a technical working group that NVTC is on, and we envision a significant amount of commission committee and jurisdiction. That effort has interim reports due November of calendar 24, and the final is booked for 5. And while that effort is very Virginia focused, we hope that it plugs into other regional efforts in this space, including those that could be occurring in DC and Maryland as we collectively look for a long-term solution. My presentation, yeah. I can answer some questions with Alan. I may have to run home for childcare.
Thank you, Andrew. You are a veteran of childcare and a rookie. Childcare, if you need to go, we'll figure out a way to get the questions answered. Go for it. Unless there are any, do commissioners have questions or comments for Walter or Andrew or Alan on this report? You do not have to claim that you read every word. I did read a lot of it this morning and sent a perhaps slightly annoying question to Andrew. Hopefully not too annoying, but I thought it was a great report. Thank you for the work in it and for your quick and excellent verbal summary of it. The last slide sort of leads me to want to thank Senator Evans for all the work carrying the bill throughout this and all your work on Metro really this past session. You've been very lucky. So unless I hear a question, we'll proceed and say, can I have a motion for the commission to accept the MVTC Metro operating funding and reform working group report?
So moved.
I think that's Senator Evans, seconded by Mr. Karantonis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed? Motion carries. I don't think there's anyone on electronically, right? Okay, great. So that addresses 4C. Go safely and speedily to your child. Next is a report from the chair of the Legislative and Policy Committee, and I'm thinking in this case, Chair Kanika Gide is unable to be here, so I'll turn this over directly to Attorney Cybert, who is with us electronically, I trust. For more details about it, what is happening with the budget and upcoming reconvene session. I suspect that it may be difficult to break news at this moment, but you may have an update as to all of us looking to the next few days and Monday where we may learn more. Over to you, Ms. Parent Cyber.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I will not take up too much time because unfortunately I don't really have any news. There's just nothing but I think just a lot of waiting that still has to happen. Obviously, we have been getting lots of action from the governor's office on bills and vetoes. But the big thing that we are waiting for, obviously, is the budget, which will probably be the last thing that comes out on Monday. He has until Monday at midnight to either amend, sign, or veto all the bills. Again, that includes the budget. I know there's been a lot of rumors floating around that he might veto the whole thing. I don't think that is an accurate rumor at the moment. I think there'll definitely be lots of amendments. But there's certainly there's the governor and the General Assembly is certainly very far apart on the budget overall. And so what that looks like when we come back for reconvene on April 17th is will be, I think that's what we're all waiting to see, how the governor is able to amend the budget and how the General Assembly reacts to that. And, just for everybody to know, from a process standpoint, when the governor amends the budget, it comes back, the General Assembly can vote on the amendments, they can sever them and vote on them separately. And then the governor, when he gets it back, he gets another chance to line item veto items, and he can still do that. So he'll have another opportunity to do that based on what the General Assembly does. There'll be one more shot that he gets to line item parts of the budget or veto the entire thing. So there is another step to that process, and it's happened in the past where that has happened. McAuliffe, for example, Governor McAuliffe did do a couple of those, and I think I'm trying to think of another governor that too, maybe Bob McDonnell. But there's been some definite goes back and comes back, and it does get some line item vetoes. So that process will happen. But we're all just waiting to see what occurs. And again, Monday will be the big day for everybody, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Parent? Well, I really appreciate you mentioning that second stage, because I think it's important to fully absorb and understand what happens on Monday before midnight, before get into Tuesday, to really understand what exactly has been done before, and we'll see. We're all hopeful, and I have no much right to appreciate on that. So, but thank you for the report, and we will move on to item 5B, which is, let's see, first, can you give us an update on your work with the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, as well as any updates on the federal side?
Yeah, absolutely. I can just make it really brief, but just to let you know, we had a regular meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee. That's DRPT's body that they use to advise when they're making changes to the operating capital allocations by the state. And so we had that meeting just last week. And I know there's a link in it from DRPT's report, but one of the things I thought was really interesting is they actually provided year-over-year transit ridership for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. And there was some really fascinating, obviously we heard a little bit from Randy specifically about Bovada, but all of Virginia transit ridership is up 20% from 2023 over 2022. It's a little bit different timeline than Randy had, but if you look at the calendar year, WMATA was up 27%, VRE was up 12%. So I think that there's actually an incredible story across the Commonwealth of how public transit ridership is rebounding. In general, when it comes to the funding, DRPT is not planning any changes policy-wise or otherwise. I think for what we did here, and Jen may add into that, or Director Rule may add into that a little bit later, is DRPT seems to have a fairly predictable set of funding coming forward. And it looks like, there's a pretty good shot of funding both the capital and obviously the operating projects that are coming through to DRPT. But again, I just want to highlight the ridership data that they have, because I thought it was actually really informative. On the federal side, lots of activity with federal appropriations getting out. I do want to do a shout out to our friends in the city of Alexandria, who successfully just awarded a transit development demonstration grant program for $550,000 to focus on the Landmark Mall area. That is a competitive grant program that any of our localities can play in, just to put that out there. And it can sometimes be an undersubscribed program, as many of the other discretionary grant programs are. There are a lot of other grant opportunities that are currently open. We already talked about the low and no emission bus We saw, for example, Fairfax County applying for. There's also another one that's out there called the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. That's $44.3 million for bike and ped projects. And I know that's something that a lot of localities have a hard time trying to find money for that. We have made sure that the MAC, our jurisdictional staff, all have access to that information. And that application period is just opened, and it's open till June, okay? And so that is something that any local government as well as state and otherwise can apply for. That's not sure an MBTC thing, but we just hear about it a lot, so I want to make sure you understand it. And the other thing, just to put up, moving into this weekend, the American Public Transportation Association, they're holding their annual legislative conference here in DC. I'm very active on their legislative steering committee, and I actually have an opportunity to present a little bit about sort of NBTC and our role in the region at one of their committees on Saturday. And I also have the opportunity to be speaking at an event that's being hosted by Keolis on Monday night. That's going to be, again, focusing sort of making how we have put forth the value of transit in the work that we've done. So there's just a lot of fun things that are going on. I think probably Mr. Smedberg may be there representing WMATA at that active conference as well. I'm just going to be in the committee meetings on Sunday, but there's a lot of activity in the transit space that's going on. So, Mr. Chair, that's what I have to report.
Great, well, it's good to hear of that last piece and the continued efforts, your continued leadership in getting out to share the work that the team's done. Do other commissioners have questions or comments on those updates, the federal and the advisory committee? Seeing none, we will go on to item 6, which is Transit Resource Center. I'd like to turn it over to Senior Program Manager, Dr. Later Hummus, to give a presentation on the climate benefits of transit in Northern Virginia. Over to you.
Thank you. All right, so this has been a study we've been working on for a few months now, and I know it's a topic that's near and dear to several hearts in this room, and hopefully we can do this topic justice. Next slide, please. So the report itself, I'm going to give a bit of an overview of it, but I'm going to present more of the highlights and quick notes this evening. We're releasing the full report next week, and so if you wish, you can read in more detail when it comes out. There's a bit of math and algebra in there to show you how we did all this stuff, if anyone is particularly interested in that. But I will be mostly glossing over that tonight. So the report itself starts with an overview of how transit generally benefits the climate. We describe different types of emissions, give a bit of a primer on like what types there are and how they're generated and what makes up emissions and how they affect the climate, different national transportation trends and how those are impacting the climate, and then trends in the transit industry and what's happening there in the energy climate space. Second part of the report focuses on policies in North Virginia. So we looked at policies of all the jurisdictions and transit agencies that operate in the MBTC region, and looked at where transit intersects with climate policy and highlighted those policies and looked at where there were opportunities to see what the trends are in that space. And then we quantified the climate benefits of transit. So there's most of this report will be most of this presentation tonight will be focusing on the quantifications. And then finally, we conclude with some recommendations for the region. Next slide, please. So why is this important for MBTC? First of all, transportation is the greatest source of emissions in the US. It's almost a third of all emissions, and over half of that comes from cars, SUVs, and pickup trucks. So it's a really important concern from a climate pollution point of view. In this region, North Virginia's share of transportation emissions is about 10% higher than the average Washington, D.C. region, so compared to Maryland and D.C. So it's a particular concern for North Virginia. Transit can help mitigate transportation emissions by moving people out of these cars, SUVs, pickup trucks to buses and trains. But as we all know, and as talked about a lot tonight, transit rideshare has recovered slower than driving, and this has a potential impact on climate on the climate. And I'll talk about more in a moment. Before we go to the next slide, as I mentioned, we covered a lot of different policies around the region, and I thought this quote down the bottom here from one of WMATA's reports was great. It says Metro's core business, moving people and public transportation, is inherently sustainable. Every trip taken with Metro instead of a car reduces the region's carbon footprint. And this is something that can be reflected across all transit agencies that operate in this region. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start each of the next few slides. We're going to highlight some of the key findings from this report. So again, glossing over the math that's behind this and just going through the highlights. So first of all, the use of public transit in Northern Virginia reduces 120,000 to 160,000 metric tons of CO2 annually. So there's a range there because we actually use two different types of data that estimate this. One was from COG and one was from the National Transit Database. The fact that these numbers are still relatively close, even though we use two different data sources, gives us confidence in the results. But what's really interesting, I think, is that the different modes affect things differently. So as mentioned before, transit can benefit the climate like people getting out of cars. So the longer the trip that's being replaced, the more benefit transit is having here. So commuter rail, I like to point out here, which is based on VRE, is particularly notable because while it's only 0.5% of ridership, it's about 9% of emissions saved in the region. So it disproportionately impacts climate because if you think about the type of trips people use for commuter rail, they're very long trips. And so people getting on a train instead of driving 30 miles, 40 miles, that's something that's hugely beneficial for the climate. But as I noted before, the pandemic has a big impact to emissions. So these numbers here are from 2017, which is when we had the most recent COG data for this kind of analysis. That's obviously not what's happened now. So you can see there's already been some changes in trends for more recent data. And it's a good thing. It's something for us to work back up to get up to because it's a hugely impactful number. But what does this number mean? Next slide, please. So the EPA website has some great ways to convert CO2 to different measures to help people understand what CO2 means. I mean, metric tons of CO2 doesn't really mean a lot to anyone, but this is a few different ways to quantify it. So, for example, it's 27,000 cars driven for 1 year. If you put those cars end to end, that's Washington, DC to Richmond, Virginia, off the road. Or 33 wind turbines running for a year, 15,000 homes, energy use for 1 year, almost 2 million trees grown for 10 years. So these are different ways to quantify what kind of impact just riding buses and trains instead of getting a car does in this region every year. Next slide, please. So finding two. All bus fuel types, even diesel buses, are a much greater environmental option than using cars. So before I go through the points on the left, the graph on the right is essentially a quantification of how full a transit vehicle has to be for it to be a better option than if people use cars instead. So it's looking at the emissions of people on a transit vehicle compared to emissions of driving instead. So 100% full means that that vehicle is at its vehicle capacity for it to be a better option. The dark green is compared to gasoline cars. The lighter green on the right is electric cars. So the first point, transit vehicles can operate less than half full and still have lower emissions than gasoline cars. So we look at those dark green bars on the left in each of those situations. You see better diesel buses, CNG buses, electric buses, commuter rail, heavy rail, which is metro rail, by the way. In every case, it doesn't even come to close to 50% full. That means the bus can continually run less than half empty and still be a better option than cars. More importantly, the more a bus is used, the lower the number of bus passengers required to replace a gasoline car. So this means that the efficiencies get even greater as you fill that bus up. The more people you put on that bus, the better the bus is compared to cars. And I'm sure some of you noting that the lighter green bars are getting above 100% at some point. It seems that electric cars become more competitive with some of the fossil fuel buses, like diesel buses, CNG buses, and even commuter rail at some points. But I'm going to touch on that on the next finding. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one's gonna be a little. This is the most complex slide in the whole deck. So bear with me. The finding is electric cars need to make up a much larger proportion of on-road vehicles for other bus fuel types to become better options. So what this graph is essentially quantifying how many people need to be on a transit vehicle for it to be a better option than cars, as the proportion of electric cars on the road increases. So that bottom axis, the x-axis is how many cars on the road are electric cars. So 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100%. That's how many what proportion of cars on the road are electric. To give you some indication, right now, we are about 1% of all cars on the road are electric. So very far left of that graph is where we are today. There's not very many electric cars out there. This region may be slightly above average for the country, but it's still very, very low. So what this is telling us that right now today, electric cars aren't very competitive when it comes to buses because there's just not a lot of them. And we have a few different comparisons to different fuel types here. The dotted line at the top is diesel buses, then you have CNG buses, and then you have electric buses. So if you increase the number of electric cars on the road from 1% of all cars to 20% of all cars, which is that first vertical line, red line there, you see that we only need to have an additional 2 people in a bus for the bus to still be a better option. That's a huge change in electric vehicles. I think the estimates that I have looked at for this is that to get to that point, I think it's the end of this decade is on the most optimistic side of getting to that point. More importantly, for electric buses to be the same benefit as diesel buses today. So basically, if we so right now it's about 13 or 14 people in an average diesel bus to be better than cars. For electric buses to have that same benefit, you would need to have 85% of all cars on the road be electric. So that's electric cars are more competitive when it comes to buses. I know this is there's a lot of math behind this, and the overall picture is like fairly straightforward. It's just a lot of technical understanding behind it. But essentially, the useful thing to take away from this is 85% on the most optimistic projections is over 20 years away. An average bus is on the road for 12 years. So you can replace buses, a whole fleet of buses, almost 2 times before you get to a point where you should be, your electric fleet is, your bus needs to be all electric, is essentially the point. So we're a while away from this being a pressing cause when we're looking at electric cars. So while there's time to fully transition to bus fleets, we need to start planning for the transition. I mean, 20 years sounds like a lot of time, but these things don't happen all at once. And this is so why the work of Anne, my colleague Anne's work is so important, because she's working on some of this stuff for the region, and each of the regional agencies is working on their own zero emission transition plans. These are all important things, even though we don't necessarily be all electric buses tomorrow. It's something we need to be thinking about because we need to get there eventually in the next couple of decades. I know that was a very tough slide to get through, but it is the toughest one actually. Next slide, please. So this slide here touches more on the policies, a little bit easier, I think, for a lot of people. So the takeaway from here is that there are opportunities for the region's jurisdictions and transit agencies to learn from each other's policies. We looked at 27 different documents that intersected transit and climate policies. We actually considered way more than that, but these are the only ones that actually included those policies. Content was categorized in 3 different ways. We have different environmental goals, transit actions, and different performance measures that track this stuff. We did find there's very little overlap between jurisdictions, which is why there's an opportunity to learn from each other, because everyone has different environmental goals, different transit actions to achieve these goals, and different ways to track performance. The table on this slide gives you some examples of the different policies that different jurisdictions and agencies in this region are using to try and reduce emissions through transit. So, for example, improving equity or incentivizing transit-oriented development to increase ridership are in there. Zero emission buses, unsurprisingly, are in there. Even if we're focusing on facilities like energy efficient lighting and solar panels, putting on on-road charging or bus operating infrastructure to help improve reduce climate pollution. And then even simple things like increasing education or energy audit. Next slide, please. And this is going to be my last content slide. So as I mentioned before, there are also some recommendations. Because as I highlighted earlier, diesel buses are still very beneficial. The number 1 recommendation is just increased ridership. More people on buses, more people on trains. That is a climate policy in itself. Next is reducing the miles and hours when a transit vehicle is not taking passengers, what we call deadheading, where possible. So when a bus or train is not in revenue service, when it's not taking passengers. Next, increase the amount of transit in the region in general. We talked about that a little bit this evening, but that is something that can help with the ridership, but then also better service and encourage people to get out of cars. Speed up buses using bus operating infrastructure and policies. We talked a little bit about interventory service this evening and BRT. That is one of those ways to help improve, reduce emissions in the region. And then finally, transition to zero emission buses. It's an important policy, but again, it's one that we can take a measured approach with and be very strategic about. And then this quote on the right here, again, this is one from one of our jurisdictional partners. This one's from Dash. I thought this was a good one that highlights that the increased ridership point. The environmental benefits of transit only arise from many people riding the bus rather than driving, taking a taxi, or otherwise getting a ride in a private vehicle. So ridership is a very key point here. Getting people on buses and trains is really important to helping climate in the region. That is it for this. These are the cliff notes I said. Even then, it was a little bit intense at some points, I guess I could say. The full report is going to be available next week, and happy to take any questions from anyone who has them.
Thank you. I'm like sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for the full report. Incredible. And if I followed it appropriately, I want to try to figure out correct conclusions. Well, first of all, thank you for the recommendations. It seems intuitive, but to know that we've done this work and to really show the importance of that ridership and that even if the people buses, right, still much more. Exactly. That's even if you get to 20%, right, of all cars being there, only 1%. So, you know, this is really helpful because you get both for people supporting and people not supporting so much the transition, that data of like, what does it actually mean? I guess my question is, I don't know if this can be looked at here, is number one, will the report help us as we're doing our strategic planning, or is that something that I hope we'll be able to include in that?
The research.
Follow-on studies.
Yeah, you'll get some insight to that next week as well, because that will be our next PAC meeting. But yeah, we will be touching that a little bit. I don't think this will be the only thing you see touching in the environment coming out of METC. This one is just particularly focused on.
And then taking a step further is that as we have limited budgets, right? And we are 100% invested in, you know, and transit and in the environment and reducing the climate impact, what's best for the climate. It's hard for us, and I think being able to understand the short, medium, and long term of where we make those investments, right? Is it in electric vehicles? Is it in transit systems? Is it in buses, right? Helping us be able to use that data as we look at our short, middle, and long-term planning. Because I think there are a lot of opinions and thoughts out there, but that in the from decisions. But is it something that is that then we take into beyond?
I will start by saying I'm not going to tell people what to do. This is to help inform others and make their decisions. I will say the concern about doing what's best for the environment and balancing budgets is one of the reasons why this was conceived in the first place, because zero emission buses are great for many reasons, but they're also more expensive than your regular diesel bus. And there's a lot of concerns about where we are with technology and things like that. And this is hopefully to help us understand that we are already benefiting the environment doing what we do today. We can do better with zero emission buses and other alternative fuel fleets. But we can be strategic and with our approach and not necessarily rush if we are not ready for it. And so this is the data is available, and people can repeat this kind of exercise to like what's going to work for us, so that we are making a measured and thoughtful approach to increasing the environmental benefit of transit in this region. but also knowing that we are already doing a good job. And that is good to know because that's one of the reasons why I like working in transit, because I know like we are doing good things for the environment just by running the buses and trains we have today.
I'll stop there, yeah. Thank
Great,
you.
I think it's a great question,
I
and
want to use that quote.
great question, and also sort of makes me think a little bit jealous of Alexandria, because your pictures here and your quote, and you made it cool to go on that. You know, and I want my bus to be cool, and a lot of people want, but,
Well,
but,
and the transit-oriented communities that, I like
Yeah.
that, what Randy said, not just about the whole community.
yep, yes, Commissioner, Vice Chair Snyder.
Thanks. So this week we heard a conversation on various highway projects that are part of the long term. And one of the participants basically said, well, if we just, as we convert our single use vehicles to electric, that will really achieve the environmental benefits we want. So what I would like is a word track, if you will, of that fairly complex chart, so that we can explain that, number one, it would take 85% of the vehicle fleet to equal what we can do for transit. And we know that seems to be getting further and further off each day as fewer and fewer people are buying electric. And I assume we're talking about 100% electric, we're not talking about hybrid.
It is a mix of both, but even combining both is still less than 1% today. And so all those measures are still very far off.
So what I'm trying to figure out in words, if you will, that notion that we can meet our transportation and environmental goals simply by converting cars to electric vehicles. That would only be remotely possible if 85% of the cars were electric, which we know we're not going to hit for years or decades. In the meantime, if you really want to achieve your environmental goals, here's where to put the money. And that's the point that I would like to have more specific information. Better to express it even.
It is a fairly complicated concept. One thing I also want to highlight is that this report's focus is fairly narrow, and these are the benefits that's in that. One thing this report does not discuss is land use. And Randy has talked a little bit about that tonight. Transit-oriented communities discusses that a lot. But that is one of those things as well that really would benefit from that discussion. It's not something that's within our scope of what we do at MBTC, but it's very closely related to what's described in here and the benefit of transit versus cars. And I think that's something that should be considered as well in that discussion, but it's a little bit out of the scope of stuff that we do here.
I would like to keep this cleanly on, because, and yes, you can have a separate discussion on land use, but that brings its own controversies. I would like something to say to someone who says, well, we don't need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We don't need more transit. All we need to do is have all of our cars electric. And what I think you have found is, for that to be a good argument, you need 85% of the vehicles to be electric to somehow equate to some funding level in transit and achieve much more realistically by investments in transit.
It sounds to me as though you're a second or third, many of us are looking forward to the full text of the report, but you also both are kind of asking for an application post-report of the research and something short. And so that does seem to me that something that could really be useful. And so that means that there's the glory of follow-up once you've done your long report. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. And I do also feel as though, I think we all know that you have to learn it yourself. If you hear someone else say it, you sometimes don't pick it up. That certainly was the case with some of our land use discussions that we've had, and I'm sure others as well. So thank you for the presentation. Yes, Walter, go ahead.
Very quick question. So maybe a different application for your study. Will the final report address an issue that all of our bus systems run into in terms of system optimization? And it's basically the flip side of what you presented. Are there situations, at what level is there an environmental argument for dropping routes if there's only one person riding the bus or whatever? Is that going to be, will that data be available in your?
I haven't done that analysis, and not so sure if it's one that I think that with the methods that we apply here, jurisdictional partners could use that kind of evaluation themselves to sort of see that. I will also say that the decision to drop a route is often more than just the environmental consideration.
Absolutely. Equity consideration, there are many more, but I am very interested to see if there could be an environmental argument, as long as we're running diesel buses for very low.
I think it's a great question and worth exploration. I also would say, Dr. Harmon, you could say sometimes the answer is no. It's a good question.
It's gonna be a later.
It would be a different piece of research, but I'm really glad you asked the question, because I do think it's a good one. We're facing it right now, and with one route, so one or two routes. So kind of managing all of the different pieces. We have a couple of other presentations too. We move on to item 7, which is VRE CEO Rich Dalton, who I think is available remotely. Can't be with us in person. He's going to give us a report and answer questions, has been followed by VRE Operations Board Vice Chair Bagley introducing the VRE staff presentation on 2050 system plan. So now over to you, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Commission members. I'll be concise here. You do have my or the CEO report in your package. Just want to highlight for the month of March, similar to what Randy reported in his presentation, we continue to see an increase of federal workers returning back to the system. That was slightly offset by spring break in the area, so our ridership was essentially just on par with what we saw in February, which we saw a nice increase from the month of January. Our system on-time performance, we did struggle there. Did not meet our target of 90%. I'll just say some unique, if you will, opportunities or issues there. One of which being a fire adjacent to the railroad right away at Marine Corps Base Quantico that shut us down one afternoon and delayed all of our trains. Had some various switch and signal issues on all of our host railroads throughout the month, and of course with congestion being an issue for us out there. Nonetheless, our system on-time performance, knock on wood here, for the first few days of the month of April, has rebounded slightly, and we hope that continues throughout the month. That'll be my report there, Mr. Chair. I know we do have a presentation here, so I'll take any questions if anybody has them at this time.
Questions or comments for Mr. Bell? Seeing none and not hesitating too much, thank you for the honest, your succinct and honest sort of summary of your hard work on performance, and good to hear about the month of April. I'm sorry about the unique circumstances. Over to Ms. Bagley to introduce the VRE staff who are here to give the presentation on 2050.
Thank you, Chair Bronte. Tonight we have VRE Planning Program, Program Manager Nick Louise here tonight to brief us on the VRE 2050 system plan. Since June 2022, VRE has been updating the system plan to respond to numerous changes in regional travel patterns. A lot has changed since the system plan was last updated in 2014, with the rise in telework and non-traditional work schedules, changing regional demographics, as well as a major commitment by the Commonwealth to grow and improve rail service through transforming rail in Virginia. The commission will be asked to adopt the full 2050 system plan at a later meeting too. I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bagley, and members of the board, happy to be here tonight. We'll go ahead and jump right in, because I know we're a little short on time, with the first slide. To give you some background and context as to why we updated our system plan. So the current system plan as adopted was last updated in 2014. And really, when we talk about a system plan, that's VRE's long-range plan that establishes our operations vision. That's how that's the service concept that we want to work towards in the 20 to 30 year timeline. And as Ms. Bagley said in her introduction, the communities that make up Northern Virginia and our region have really changed a lot since 2014. Our region is projected to grow here in the next 25 years by 35%, but our neighbor to the south in Fredericksburg, that region is projected to grow by a much faster percentage, 65%. Telework still remains a fixture of the post-pandemic working reality. Back in 2019, only 59% of 59% of VRE riders did not telework at all, 0 days a week. Now that number in 2022 is only 37%. And then we had a tremendous opportunity to be part of a once in a lifetime transformational opportunity with Transforming Rail Virginia. By about 2030, when Long Bridge and several other key pieces of infrastructure have been completed on the rail corridors, VRE will be able to run over 60% more service than we currently run today. So it's a once in a lifetime opportunity to expand our network, and we wanted to revise our system plan to respond to that. If you go to the next part of the slide, I think it goes without saying that, the Northern Virginia region doesn't end at the Occoquan River. And so any transit improvement that we make, that benefits folks that live outside of the NVTC jurisdictions benefit NVTC jurisdictions. As regions south of us grow, those people are going to be demanding services, employment in our regions. They'll be driving on our roads and accessing our amenities. And so to move as many of those folks off of the highway system and onto the rail system will be a significant benefit to us here in the next 20 years. If you go into the next slide, talking about benefits, we hope to quantify all of these benefits in the final plan document that will come before this body in the next couple of months. I do have a slide further on that does quantify a few of these key benefits that I think are most striking. I think it dovetails very nicely with Dr. Harmony's presentation just a few minutes ago on some of the major benefits of commuter rail in this region. So if you go to the next slide, we started the planning process, and everything over the past 18 to 20 months has been done with our eye on this core vision, and that's that VRE is going to grow to serve the region as a transportation service of choice, creating meaningful connections and economic opportunities in a safe, sustainable, and equitable manner. Everything we've done, all the alternatives and the scenarios that we've considered as part of this plan, as part of this planning process, have been underpinned by this vision statement. On the next slide, we have 4 primary goals. When we were screening scenarios, service scenarios down from a very long list of over 20 to a more manageable list of 4 for the 2050 horizon, we considered these 4 items primarily as our screening methodology. So moving on to the next slide, just a little bit about our process. So as was mentioned at the top of the presentation, we began around about the middle of 2022. And we've had a 3-phase approach here, and that's really to allow us to pause. After a couple months of analysis and process, to understand if there's anything that needed to be changed. And so we're in the final phase of a 3-phase process, that hopefully should culminate in acceptance by our governing bodies and will allow us to transition seamlessly into a period of implementation. And so what that'll look like, if you go to the next slide here, as I mentioned, Transforming Rail in Virginia gives us
some key infrastructure by 2030. So there's already kind of a pre-programmed playbook for how we can grow to meet the needs of the region in the next 6 or 7 years. And that's, as I mentioned, running up to 63% more weekday round trips, starting weekend service, and really starting to become more of a holistic 7-day-a-week operation. And also completing key infrastructure projects up and down our corridors to enable us to serve more customers, as well as constructing a new storage facility in DC at New York Avenue Yard, which will allow us to store our trains, on our property, and allow us to grow beyond 2030. So that's 2030, and that seems like a lot more than what we're doing today, but it gets better, right? So if you move on to the next slide, what we're proposing in our draft system plan is a concept of commuter rail operations that really starts to move us from a commuter rail system to more of a regional rail concept, with still a very well-defined and strong peak period transit service. So in the peak period, peak direction, we would be proposing to run a train on every line every 20 minutes, and in the reverse peak, a train every half of an hour. We also propose to run trains at least once an hour on a clock face type schedule, for the span of services that we've listed here on the weekdays and the weekends. And what that does is it provides a baseline level of service that allows us to become really the spine of the region as far as transit connectivity. One of the most notable improvements, and this is something that we'll be able to do even before 2050, is start to run some more, slick service patterns, skip stop or express services to really provide a more travel time competitive ride for the folks that live in the outer jurisdictions of Spotsylvania, Fredericksburg, and the outer parts of Prince William County. And we think this will really help improve our time competitiveness, really help push people to the rail system, when they're ascertaining whether or not it's quicker to drive or to take the other. And so moving on to the next slide, just a quantification of those benefits. And I really like going after Dr. Harmony because we're kind of the small, piece of the pie here of the overall benefits. But just if you look on your far right, because this is really the far right column shows at the 2050 proposed level of service in 2050, what those benefits are. 51 million mile VMT reduced, in 2050, $16.7 million annual vehicle operating cost savings. That's direct dollars back into people's pockets. So that's a lot of mortgages, that's a lot of college educations, and that's a lot of trips to dinner, trips to ball games and stuff. So really, when you compare the cost of driving in the region with the cost of taking transit, that's where those numbers come from. And then I also want to point out, in addition to the other two benefits, the two benefits that are listed below the dark black bar are not specific VRE, but they are more general to the RF&P freight corridor. That's our Fredericksburg line corridor. So thanks to our friends, the data of our friends at DRPG, we were able to quantify that in 2030, the benefit to this region of the freight network, just the ability for the rail network to handle the amount of freight trains on a mixed-use corridor is over $157 million, 2020 dollars, right? So that's a tremendous amount of economic benefit to the Commonwealth and to our region, just to be able to provide the amount of capacity to allow for passenger service and for freight service. And another little interesting tidbit. So we took a look at what that does in removing truck trips off of 95, the parallel highway. So if the rail corridor did not exist in 2030, you would need to put an additional 4,180 trucks on 95 every single day. So if you put them end to end, right? We love those comparisons, the end-to-end comparisons. That's a one lane of trucks, solid trucks, from the Pentagon to past exit 126 in Spotsylvania County, 67 miles across. So the rail network provides a tremendous benefit, you know, to the entire region, even if a lot of the ridership, the future ridership and the future growth is going to occur places outside of MBTC. So moving on to the next slide, and if there's only one slide that you remember that you take away from this presentation, it should be this one. That we really hope that in 2050, and even before that, VRE becomes that regional transit spine, so that somebody who's looking to take a longer distance trip can connect to all of these local transit providers. Essentially, almost all of our stations by 2050 will be served by some form of transit. We'll also have, we propose in our plan a network of longer distance connecting bus services that would connect in Manassas and Fredericksburg to some of our even farther out communities in Central Virginia that don't really have any good transit options for commuting into the region's core that are growing. They're just not growing as fast. There's not as many people today, but the population projections really show that there's going to be a tremendous amount of growth that takes people off of Route 29, Route 28, and Route 1 and 95. And so going on to the next slide, just quantifying the level of service in a different way. We're proposing to run 58 trains per day on each line. That's significantly higher than the number of trains that we currently operate, which is 16 on each line. And then also you can see the connecting bus services to the points farther south of Manassas and Fredericksburg. Moving on to the next slide here, just wanted to quantify, to give you all the full context, the estimated capital costs. Now these costs are represented in 2024 dollars. It's because of the complexities of showing different costs at different times, between now and 2050. But we are going to need to do additional capital improvements beyond what's programmed in Transforming Rail in Virginia and beyond what we have in our current CIP. And that'll amount to approximately $359 million in additional capital improvements. These are conservative estimates, assuming that current ridership and station access patterns stay the same, but certainly as the region, continues to promote transit-oriented communities and transit-oriented development, things like parking requirements and that, might change. And so we really hope over the next couple of years to further refine this plan as we get a better understanding for how each of the jurisdictions' land use, might be changing with updated comprehensive plans and the like. So moving on, just to subset these next two slides here, talking about our fleet. Currently we run a 100 coach car fleet. We'll need to expand that fleet by 68 cars by the 2030 decade. So we'll have 168. And then we'll need to be a little over 200 rail cars in revenue operation by 2050 to be able to achieve that level of service. Now, I will say that there's more cars proposed. However, we will be running our trains in a more efficient manner. So each train will have a higher utilization, and we'll be able to cycle them more efficiently since we'll be running more of a regional rail type of service versus in the morning, out in the afternoon. Same story on the next slide with our locomotive fleet procurement plan. We're currently operating 20 locomotives. They will need to be phased out here within the next decade, as they're starting to come to the end of their useful life. And fortunately or unfortunately, right about that same time, if we follow through with our expansion plans, we'll also need to purchase new. So ultimately in 2050, we'll be proposing to run a 31 locomotive fleet. And then, moving on to the next slide, is just from the operating side of things. If we keep the level of service at 2030 levels, we're projecting about a $375 million annual operating budget. If we enhance the service to 2050 levels of service, as I showed with the 56 trains per line, we get to an $884 million annual operating budget. Our operating revenues are projected to increase by about 63%, but between the kind of the 2030 level of service and the 2050 level of service, And that's just a reflection in, a roughly 25% increase in marginal ridership that we could gain from running that much more service. So if you move on to the next slide, just a little bit of a snapshot to show you how significant that growth percentage in ridership is projected to be by 2050. Right now, we're in the 7,700 average daily rider range. By 2030, by implementing this plan, we could be at 21,000 riders, and then by 2050 at 28,000 riders. And so, that's 28,000 daily trips that are not on 95, they're not on 66. They're enjoying the benefits of a better connected region. So not an insignificant, benefit. And moving on to my final slide here, we look to go to our friends in Woodbridge next month and present an identical presentation to PRTC. We also look to go back to our operations board at their June meeting and present and ask for action on the final plan. And then we hope to return to NBTC in July. And Rich, please correct me if anything's changed since we put these slides together, but hope to come back to this board in July to ask for your action. So that's my presentation. Hope it was quick enough, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Mr. Alpine.
Yeah, when it comes back, I'd really love to see more on the land use side. Because I think there may be some assumptions in here that I think it needs to be, with this kind of investment, I think we need to make sure that we're actually seeing the investments by the local governments and the land use.
And I'll just say,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say that, the current ridership projections and the models, we use the Council of Governments, the TPP model, and that just assumes what's already programmed in your comprehensive plans is what's going to happen between now and 2050. So if anything changes, we would have to redo those assumptions.
Walkinshaw, did you?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, but I just thank Nick. I mean, it's been really great work. I think will be a very visionary plan. And one thing that's important for those of us here at NBTC to understand is that when you look at between now and 2050, the fastest growing counties in our region, with the exception of Loudoun, are VRE served counties that are for the most part not served by Metro. So Prince William will add 300,000 people between now and 2050. Stafford will add 100,000 people. Spotsylvania will add 50,000 people. And VRE is the transit system for those jurisdictions. So it's critical that we make it through this challenging time in VRE's history, but for the future of our entire region, especially those jurisdictions, those of us who would prefer not to have those cars driving through our jurisdictions, it's really important that we establish this plan and work towards it. And I also think the 2030 adjustments and plans, one of which we've been starting, I think, as soon as this calendar year with the first Saturday service, is going to be kind of a key experiment for us to see how popular it is and how successful it is as we build towards this 2050 plan. It's clearly that whole flexibility of the service model key, but the growth in especially the I-95 corridor jurisdiction is and will continue to be explosive, and VRE has to deliver those jurisdictions and for ours that are between them and where they're trying to get it. Really helpful. Thanks, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Is there a question over here? Mr.
Yeah.
Medford?
You mentioned the region spine. There's always been talk about running VRE into Maryland and vice versa. I didn't see it mentioned here. I'm sort of curious, sort of why not, or you just wanted to keep it confined to the Commonwealth?
And I could do a whole nother 20-minute presentation on why we did not include it in this plan, but the short answer is we looked at ways that we could most effectively use our resources, as well as to respond to some of the infrastructure challenges that might not always be apparent to folks in Northern Virginia, most specifically at the Union Station terminal complex. We did a pretty in-depth look at where and how many of the trips would be going to places in Maryland from the VRE catchment areas. And it is a very, very small number. There's far more demand for folks in Maryland wanting to come to places like Crystal City and Alexandria. And so, you know, we have set our plan up, not to preclude, operators like Mark and others running into our territory. And we certainly have kind of an operations model that accommodates that. But as far as VRE, you know, running into Maryland, we chose not to pursue that in the long run.
And just one other quick question, Chair. There was, I know some talk at one point about doing an offshoot to Dulles area in the airport. Was there any talk of that or discussion about that?
The Silver Line provides fairly good service.
Yeah, no, yeah, but not
From,
from the Manassas line itself.
Yeah, so I believe at the beginning of our planning process, we asked the question, should we be considering any greenfield or new rail alignments? And, you know, it goes back to the efficient use of resources and just the immense, you know, environmental and land use challenges that would come with expanding service outside of the existing road. So we did not include that. We wanted to be aspirational, but we didn't want to go so far that the plan becomes unachievable.
Really interesting. But wouldn't some of them be on road, a lot of roads, like 28 and 66?
Yeah, we just didn't, you know, get to that level of detail and looking at it.
Sure. This will come back, but we have Vice Chair Snyder and there may be other questions.
I guess my fundamental question goes to this. Going back to really the first slide, telework will needs a fixture of post-pandemic work. I think the assumption that you seem to be making or that's made in the report is we'll provide more service and therefore more people will ride it. But if they're riding it at the current percentage of riders, you will have not you, but a huge amount of resources will have been expended for not many riders. So the question is, what projections are you making that would assume that these future trains will be more full than the trains we're running now, considering the popularity of telework? One of the things I see about Metro is that there's a pretty rapid recovery of ridership. It took a while, but it's getting there. That recovery seems not to be happening with VRE. So I'm asking a tough question now, so when this comes back to us. But it's a very aggressive program. And it looks great on paper, but how do we know people are going to actually be riding it?
That's an excellent question, and I think it's a two-part answer. So the first part being, you know, when you look at providing transit service, there's a certain elasticity. So as you start to provide, you go from just a peak service to an all-day service, or just an all-day service that runs every hour to a service that runs every 20 minutes. You can see, you know, significant increases in the usefulness of that service to people who aren't taking those traditional federal workforce, you know, commute trips. I mean, over 70% of our ridership today is federal workers, right? And we would really like to be a more sustainable service by diversifying that ridership pool. And to do that, you have to provide services at different times of day to be a more useful option. The second part to your question is, we had some travel demand modelers take a look at the telework assumptions, and we built that into our ridership projections. And I think what we presented is actually a rather conservative ridership projection approach that assumes that telework doesn't go back down to the levels below 2019 levels, and that it actually grows kind of on the low end at the floor, right? Grows with how telework was growing prior to the pandemic, because some folks, you know, don't remember that telework was actually a fairly significant fixture of this region even before we had a COVID pandemic. So the ridership figures in the final report will be reported as a range, and that will be essentially taking into consideration a more aggressive telework kind of scheme in the region, or a much less aggressive, and we hope that we would fall somewhere kind of in the middle of that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Good question, Ms. Bagley.
And just to that point, though, I think it's interesting to note how when Randy was here earlier talking about Nevada, how their recovery was actually happening not in the peak hours, which is all that VRE really had to offer. And so I share, Mr. Schneider's sort of concern about how conservative these estimates, are they assuming telework continuing? But I think there's a lesson potentially in WMATA, which is they saw their biggest returns happen in the middle of the day by visitors, by weekends, and that's held true now for years. So I think like to Commissioner Walkershaw's point, the weekend service that we're going to try out, I think was a good experiment in that, because I think it is important as we're making these 2030 and 2050 plans to just see what the responsiveness is in these other timeframes. Because I think WMATA could be instructive here, that there is demand and interest outside of the commuter peak hour experience.
It's a great set of points, and it's an excellent presentation. I'm pretty sure that's the best presentation I've heard in year two at 8:30, starting at 8:50. That was really, it was great, and the questions were good, and you may want to end up just looking back at the video to see where you want to dig in a few months, but thank you very much, Mr. Greaves, and thank you, Mr. Dalton, for your team, as well as commissioners for the questions. This will come back to us, and hopefully we've been helpful in moving this along. So moving on, I believe next is I think I should mention that 7C is the DRE Title VI Service Standards and Policies Monitoring Results. I think that's information only, and move on to DRPT, and magically Jen Rule has appeared on our screen. And so over to you for your report.
Good evening, Chair DeFerranti, members of the commission. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. You have my written report. I'll highlight a couple of things that really pick up with what Kate reported about TSDAC. We're putting the finishing touches on our budget and 6-year program now, and they will be released for public comment. I think about April 16th, around the April CTB meeting. The Northern Virginia hearing on the program is scheduled for April 23rd. And then we're doing something a little different this year, where we're going to have a DRPT standalone statewide hearing that'll be virtual and also in person in our Alexandria office, and that'll be on May 16th. So a couple opportunities for public involvement coming up. Another thing Kate mentioned was ridership. We do produce a report every month for the Commonwealth Transportation Board that highlights ridership. But I also want to point out that we have an open data portal where you can drill into each individual system statewide ridership trends over the last 5 years. And that data has been really helpful for us to be able to tell the great story of transit in Virginia and kind of get away from some of the conjecture and themes that don't really align with the data. So glad that we're able to do that for our transit agencies statewide. Last thing that I'll mention, and this again will pick up on something that Kate mentioned, in addition to the APTA Legislative Conference this week, APTA is hosting with the Japan International Travel and Tourism, and I'm going to get that wrong, but Japanese tourism group is hosting a rail symposium, and that is going to be on the afternoon of April 11th from 3 to 6. That is free for registration. It's also available virtually, and so I think that's another good opportunity. I'm going to moderate a panel there. It's another opportunity for us to highlight the great work we're doing in Virginia with passenger rail. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or give you a little bit of time back.
Thank you very much. I have 9 questions, but they will wait. Thank you for the report and for mentioning the different pieces, the data, as well as the upcoming sessions. Appreciate it. Kate, do you have your executive director report to share with us?
Absolutely. As always, we do have a fantastic printout that'll also be going out via email. I think actually many commissioners got it today, but also we usually typically send it out tomorrow. A couple things just to highlight. We had a really fantastic actually staff retreat. I think that was just a week ago, but maybe it's a little bit more than that now. This is something that we do every year, where we basically do a bunch of team building. This time we actually talked about strategic thinking. I've got some really good tips and tools for the staff to use that. The other thing I want to highlight is that, again, as you know, this is our 60th anniversary. We've started launching a bunch of history tidbits on our social media, and we do have 2 events that are going to be coming up that hopefully you already saw save the date for our Friday, June 14th Transit Innovation Summit. which is going to be at George Mason University here in the Arlington campus. Registration is actually going to open up for that next week. And we also have something we want to absolutely make sure that is on all of your calendars, which is Thursday, September 5th, which is our evening celebration and documentary premiere. We do expect to have a wonderful group of former commissioners, as well as all of you, as well as some of our congressional delegation and others at it. So there'll be much more to that, but I do want to make sure that you mark your calendars for Thursday, September 5th, which is typically a commission meeting night. We hope to not have a commission meeting. We can hold it short if we need to, but I want to make sure you had that. The other thing I want to do is recognize we do have new staff. Daniel Nickelbein has just joined us as a senior program analyst. He's going to be primarily working on the commuter choice program, and he's already had some interest in our Envision Route 7 and legislative work, and we're excited to have him on board. We snagged him over from Chicago. He's had a little bit of time here in DC because we actually overlapped at the Federal Transit Administration about 10 years ago. But he's got a lot of work in the Chicago area as well as down Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So we're really happy to have Daniel with us. Just a reminder, we do have Program Advisory Committee meeting next Thursday, the 11th at 4:30 upstairs, where we're going to go over the staff recommendations for the Commuter Choice 66 program and projects, talk about our Route 7 strategic plan, as well as our strategic research plan. The Joint WMATA Committee and Legislative Policy Committee will meet on May 16th. And in between all of that, we will have our next commission meeting here on May 2nd. I mentioned this before, but just a reminder, we do plan on having a July meeting on the 18th because July 4th would otherwise be our meeting, but we do plan on doing it all virtually. And I do believe the chair may have mentioned something earlier about finding who is going to come from the furthest distance away. So there's your challenge. But we do have some actions, for example, as you heard, likely the VRE system plan for action. So we definitely want to make sure folks get that on our calendar. Our financial reports are included in here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Seeing any questions? I want to thank, we're waiting on appointment of, I guess, 4 commissioners. So thanks. Five. So thanks to everyone for being here and staying here. And with that, we're adjourned.